The, out of the 100 or so people floating around the Summer Institute, there are 2 people that have been at every Summer Institute since 2015. Me and this guy. So Joel Kotek, Professor Kotek, is a professor of political science at the Free University of Brussels in Belgium and at the Institut d'études politiques de Paris in France, in Paris, France. Today he's going to speak about the history of anti-Semitism, and Joel is really doing incredible work on the academic side for many years, doing really insightful, important work, and I'm not just being polite, and also more recently, especially after October the 7th, organizing scholars in sort of in the French environment, particularly in Belgium and France, where anti-Semitism has been very intense for longer periods of time, but certainly after October the 7th. And you've been sort of, I'm sure, watching the marches on the streets and the issues that are really facing the physical security in many instances of the Jewish community and of democratic principles. So Joel's really on the cutting edge at the programming side and the intellectual research side. So Joel, it's really an honor that you're here again.
Thank you, Charles. It's a pleasure for me too. So, I'm a French speaker. I would not speak in French, but my English is not as good as you could expect it. No, you hear me or not?
No, but William, he needs a microphone.
Okay. You need a microphone.
Yeah, you can go around that.
Like this, it's okay?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So what I will try, what is important to stress, I'm an historian. And I think if you want to understand anti-Semitism today, what I call radical anti-Zionism, radical anti-Semitism, you have to go back to the history, and especially, according to me, to the Middle Age. Of course, to the 30s, as it was stressed by David Harris, but especially the Middle Age. I think not only the Middle Age, but the strange relation between early Christianity and early Islam and Judaism. This is the key if you want to understand why the Jews were always the scapegoat. It's not enough to say the Jews were the scapegoat. The question is why they were. Why the Jews? Why not, as I said in my presentation, why not the Italians? And why not the Italians? Because of course it could have been the Italians. Why? Who is responsible of the death of Jesus? Well, an Italian, of course, Ponce Pilatus, not a Jew. Who were the main banker in the Middle Age? There were no Jews, they were the Italians, the Medicis, they were bankers, etc. But who remembers it? Nobody. In the Renaissance time, as you know, Shakespeare, created the personage, the figure of Shylock, a Jew. Of course, maybe from Venice, but a Jew. And the question is why the Jews and not the Italians, etc. And I will try to explain to you. Maybe it's going to be a little bit controversial, but who cares anyway? It's my definition of anti-Semitism. I'm using a lot of course, psychology, because the only way to understand why the Jews, you have to understand, of course, the psychosis, you have to understand, I would say, it's a collective ideas, etc. And especially as Charles explained, of course, anti-Semitism doesn't speak only of the Jews, but mainly speaks about society in crisis, or not only in crisis, I would say also in mutation. And according to me, but not only according to me, but also according, as you know, one of the founding fathers of Zionism, Leon Pinsker, it's a social disease. And he invented the word, actually, Judeophobia. It's a phobia, etc. And what is important to stress, it's an individual. Some people are anti-Semite, but also a nation could be anti-Semite. And it's a collective psychosis. And my definition, again, it's my definition, what is anti-Semitism and not anti-Judaism, because I will make the difference between anti-Judaism, it means the hatred or the despise of Judaism as a religion, and anti-Semitism, the despise or the hatred of the Jews. And it's not the same. Hatred of religion and hatred of people believing in this religion. And my basic idea is the Jews are responsible for the misfortune of the world. If something went wrong, it's because of the Jews, and that's the definition. And this is a very classical motto issued in the last 1900 in Germany. The Jews, die Juden, sind unser Unglück. Les Juifs sont notre malheur. And it was repeated thousands of times everywhere in Germany after 1875, etc. And what is important to stress, and this is one of the fight, we have to convince the anti-racist fighter that anti-Semitism is different from racism and xenophobia. It's not easy, but we can, if they accept to discuss with us, because anti-Semitism is first and foremost a demonology, which is not the case of racism. Racism classified people according to absurd race theory. They are the superior and the inferior. It's not the case with the Jews, because the Jew could be a superior, but superior because of its evil relation, etc. It's a demonology, and the Jews explain the existence even of evil. And as Freud has said, the Jews, or I would say not the Jews only, the devil, it means, explain and justify Christ's powerlessness. Imagine, without the creation of the devil, how could you explain that we are not living in fantastic times, etc.? It's because of the devil, and it's because of its agent on earth, which are supposed to be the Jews, and then later on, where there will be no more Jews in Europe, the witches, etc. You have to explain, you need a cause, etc. And so this is a classical representation, 13th century, and it's extremely important to explain the medieval roots of anti-Semitism, etc. You cannot understand the hatred of the Jews if you forget the terrible relation between early Christianity and early Islam and Judaism, etc. Bravo, very nice. And what is a Jew? A Jew is a dangerous being because of its relation with the force of evil. And another difference with ordinary racism and xenophobia, and it was explained many times already, it's the fact that anti-Semitism is a conspiracy mythology, and this is very important. And this is a big difference, I would say, with classical racism, etc. Conspirationism, Jewish plot, etc. And also it dates back to the Middle Age. This is a illuminated manuscript, quite beautiful, and it explains everything. We are after the Crusades, and it shows what anti-Semitism is, a plot between the devil and the Jews, here the Sanhedrin, and committed the worst crimes ever, Christ killing. It means the Jews are responsible of the death of the Christ, etc. You can see the Christ there. And the rest is commentary. This explains, I would say, everything. It explains, in a modern way, the protocol of the wives of the elders of Zion, etc., when they will speak about le péril juif, the danger of the Jews, etc., representing the Jews not as a subhuman, but as a creature, as a spider, something dangerous, etc., that you cannot enslave because it's too dangerous, etc. And again, classical representation about the Rothschild, about the Jewish danger, the Jewish peril, in any language you can imagine, etc. And Judaism, of course, was connected. And also, what is very interesting with anti-Semitism, it's the fact that it mutates in different ways, etc. And a Jew is something and its contrary. A Jew here is connected with capitalism and could be also connected with communism. A Jew could be rich, could be poor, could be nationalist and cosmopolitan or globalist, as he said. A Jew is one thing and its contrary, etc. And this makes also the fight against anti-Semitism extremely dangerous. And so the plot, the conspiracy, the fact that they are behind the scene. This is a poster made by the Nazis in Serbia in 1943, where 95% of the Jews were already killed by the Croatian forces with the help of the Nazis, notably in Jasenovac, but not only. And then, according to the mythology, the Jews with the Mason are responsible of, I would say, the evil. And you see a Jew Mason manipulating on one side Joseph Stalin, on the other side Winston Churchill. One thing and its contrary, etc. And today it's the same. You can find in today conspiracy theory, the fact that you see Hillary Clinton and whatsoever, the fact that, the American elite are slave of the synagogue of Satan with, the very famous figure 666. And this is really derives from the origin. The Jews and the Sanhedrin, plotting with the devil to kill the Christ, etc. And the same here, Jews did this, Jews did this, and Jews, working under false flag to accuse the Arabs of actually what they are perpetrating. 11 of September, etc., whatsoever, the fact that the Jews are responsible of the misfortune of the world. And again, we spoke about the grand remplacement, this absurd theory that the Muslims, the blacks will replace the white people, etc. And according to the far right, the Jews are behind this plot. And this is, again, ultra-right Americans who say Jews explain why they bring millions of Muslims and African migrants to Europe, etc. It's absurd, but it works. Some people believing it, etc. This is an illustration made by an American, David Dean, who died, I think, 4 years ago from cancer. He used to be a mainstream illustrator, working for Disney at the origin, for Sesame Street. Then he became ill because of the ink he was using, and he became an anti-Semite, but really of the worst case, etc. And, well, he's using the word Zionists and not Jews. But anyway, the accusation is there. Immigrants, Zionists, weapon of European, genocide, the fact that Merkel, Cameron and Sarkozy, they are, in a sense, taken by the Jewish devil. You look their eyes, etc. They are puppets. They are Zionist puppets, etc. And we are in a pure conspirational myth, etc. And this is also from the same David Dean, etc. And, well, it's a Rothschild, always behind the scene. And, the reptile, the fact that the reptile people are responsible, are controlling the world, and even, controlling from Hillary Clinton to Trump. So, why? How could you explain this? Just because the Jews helped to explain what went wrong. It's important. And definition, it's important to explain. That's why they exist for. And since the Middle Ages, etc. And a case that and I don't have to, and from everywhere, it was the case in Czechoslovakia, in Czechsland, I'm sorry. I'm an old, I used to live when Czechoslovakia did exist. From Germany, and this is in France. In France, the Minister of Health was of Jewish origin. Her father was a former survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau camp, and she was accused of being responsible of the COVID virus. And what is interesting to show, it's not only that she was accused, she was portrayed with a terrible nose. Actually, she has no such a nose, but who cares? And especially, you see the medieval roots. Yeah? It means the fact that the poisoning dwell. And this means really that the trope they are using today by an anti-Semite, that dates back from the Middle Age, etc. Again, the same, this is also an American example. It's not Chinese, it's a Jewish flu. And I could send you a lot of examples like this. I've got a presentation only about anti-Semitism and COVID-19, etc. The fact that the Jews introduced this to perpetrate a white genocide against the white population, but also the Muslim population, etc. And, of course, the Jews were the scapegoat, the usual suspect. And as René Girard, the French philosopher, used to teach in California, the crystallization of persecution on an individual is often associated with the phenomenon of the scapegoat. The all against one manifests itself through the process designating a scapegoat that allows the group to rebuild its unity against the person through the sharing of a hateful emotion. And this is, well, the Jews were usually the scapegoat, but it's not enough. It means, okay, there was a scapegoat, but the question is, why the Jews? Why not the Italians? Why not, I don't know, another minority? There were many minorities. Why the Jews? And the only way to understand it, it's, as I said, to go back to the awkward relation or logic, maybe bad relation between early Christianity and early Islam. And this is what I will try to explain to you later on. And this is a very nice very, very interesting illustration of a Jew, actually, Abel Pan, who used to be a Jew living under the Tsarist rule and who finally left to go to Eretz Israel, and he died in Israel. And he showed, it's 1915, it's during the First World War. Everyone is asking, why this absurd war? Then you see France, you know, pointing Germany, Germany pointing England, John Bull, England pointing the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, and then finally all agrees, the Jews. And of course the Jews is small, because it's not responsible of anything, but of course you won't designate China, it's too strong. You would prefer to designate Israel or the Jews, because you know that even if they're supposed to be extremely strong, well, you know they're not so. And it's not so dangerous. And this is a very powerful, I will say, illustration to demonstrate what scapegoating is. And the same here. Again, David Dees. And David Dees, you know, he's showing, you know, President Macron, President of France, as the puppet of, again, Rothschild. And on one side, you've got the Rothschild, you know, signa, that means and on the other side, he's a Mason. He's supposed to be a Freemason. Okay. And again, he's reading what? The Protocol of the Wise of Zion, which means that it's, you know, despite the fact that everyone knows since 1921 that it's a fake, well, some people, and the majority of people, still believe in this book. And what is it organizing? A white genocide against the great replacement theory, according to the extreme right, that the Jews are responsible of this. So then I will show, you know, of course it's not Rothschild. Who is this man? Soros. But of course the imagination of the anti-Semite, you know, or the knowledge, a lot of ignorance. Personally, I like Soros, but I know so many people don't like him, etc. He's not, I don't think he's a Zionist, but okay, it's like this. And I know that the son of the Prime Minister of Israel even, you know, sent a lot of, unfortunately, cartoon against this man. But don't speak about him. But anyway, you need the figure of the devil. And the devil in the extreme right today, in France, is Jacques Attali, who is not a banker, but he's an economist who used to work for François Mitterrand, despite the fact that he was a socialist. He is designated as the globalist, but in the Anglo-Saxon world, it's Soros. And this is an example of Rothschild, Soros manipulating the United States. And you need, you know, you need the devil, and it's a personification, the agent, in a sense, of devil, etc. Then you see Soros, well, who is a banker, being presented as a communist, etc., with a cultural, etc., and then, you know, responsible, manipulating the left and the right. And this is interesting. George Soros, the most evil man of this planet. Wow, 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 wow. Responsible for refugee invasion of Europe, Arab Spring, Ukraine revolution, anti-Trump protest, Black Lives Matter, etc. So he's responsible for everything. And this concentrates the essence, I would say, of what anti-Semitism is, etc. And this is a French cartoon. It's interesting too. It has been produced by someone connected to the French extreme right. And well, he showed what is the new international world order. And it started with Rothschild. Then you've got Rockefeller. Well, Rockefeller is not a Jew, but for a French, it sounds Jew. So he's a Jew. Then you've got Soros, and then Baphomet. Who is Baphomet?
Satan, basically.
What?
Satan, basically.
Baphomet is supposed to be the god that the Templar used to worship in the 13th century, and the reason why the King of France finally decided to terminate with them. So it means Baphomet, looks like Mohammed, etc. Mahomet, and then you can see, okay, there is a continuity from the Middle Age till the present time, etc. So the tropes, you have to understand, you have to go to history. If not, you don't understand. Though the idea is blame the Jews. And why the Jews? The same. How could you explain that German army who were 70 kilometers from Paris, they were in France? finally were defeated. Why? The only explanation, of course, for someone called Hitler or Hindenburg was because of the betrayal of the civilian, and the civilian being the Jews. It means the knife in the back mythology, etc. The Jews and the communist Jews, the capitalist Jews, were responsible of the defeat of the German and then here the Austrian army, etc. So anti-Semitism is a cultural code, and this is interesting. Of course, this is also a big difference, which strikes even society. As you know, it's not that you will learn a lot concerning dealing without Jews. You don't need Jews to have anti-Semitism, etc. And this is a good example, and it shows that, okay, you can make love of anti-Semitism because those people as immunization that, you couldn't invent such idiocy. You can see that a so-called Japanese historian wrote a book in 1979, say that Enola Gay meant kill the emperor in Yiddish. Is it true that it means in Yiddish? Of course not. No, of course not. It's absurd, but some people believe it. And it was a bestseller, etc. Of course, Enola Gay was the name of the mother of the pilot, etc. But he wrote it. So the same, I'm specialized on genocide, and I'm working on the Tutsi genocide. And, there is a rumor that Israeli Zionists are connected with the Tutsi to control the Central Africa, etc. And you can see Great Lake, the Israelo-Zionist road, explaining the fact that there are 100 Jews 100 Jews and Israeli living only in Rwanda, but with 100, we know we can control a country and a region. And this is the same, just for fun. If you want to explain the problem that you can find in the Middle East today or in the Mashrek or the Maghreb, then you will find that if you don't like someone, you have to depict him as a Jew, and that's it. And then you will see Morsi. He was not a Jew, as you probably noticed. Gaddafi, this was from an extreme right website, saying that Gaddafi was half a Moroccan Jew. Then you see also el-Baghdadi, the inventor of Daesh, being also Moroccan Jew, his real name being Simon Elliot. Well, it doesn't sound Sephardic, but who cares? And then, of course, Assad, the butcher of Syria, representing as Hasid. Well, it's a real picture, I'll tell you the truth. But nobody. And then you've got also Ghanouchi, who used to be, for a while, leader of the Muslim Brother in Tunisia, etc. So the Jews are dangerous being, harmful being, etc. So you can't cope with them. They're dangerous. And so this is a Nazi representation of the Jews. The Jews, I don't know how to name the insect in chenille in French, in English, but it's destroying the world. And on one eye you see the dollar, and on the other eye you see the communist sign, etc. So they are both. Communists and Jews are working together. Communists and capitalists are working together. And on the other side, it's a book that were given to the German soldier in 1944, when all the Jews were already killed in Europe. We spoke about between 6 and 7 million of Jews killed, because the Holocaust by bullet maybe killed more Jews than we believed. And they named the Jews als Weltparasit. It means so. And how would you cope with a parasite? It means to kill. It means antibiotic, etc. And this is the Holocaust. And those are posters made in Poland, depicting the Jews as lice, etc. So, and how do you cope with the lice? It means you kill them, etc. You don't enslave them, etc. And then posters of film that were produced, etc. And this is a poster that you can still find, of course, in Iran, in a place called Palestine Square in Tehran, who used to be the place where you had the Israeli embassy before the the Ayatollah took power there, and they represent, of course, the Jews as a demon, etc. And you can see in the end of the parenthesis, etc. And so again, considering medieval trope, Jews, in any manifestation you will find, the fact that the Israeli soldier are the only soldier interested in killing children. And this is, of course, a remind of the accusation during the Middle Age, after the 13th century, of the Jews being responsible of ritual murder, etc. The first case being in England, actually, in 1144. And those things are repeating. And this is, again, a medieval trope, etc. And this is just new, fresh anti-Semitic representation. Thank God internet exists. And this is how some people, are trying to destroy the image of the Israeli Olympic delegation. And voila. And this is it, etc. So the question is, and this is the big difference, so from ordinary racism and xenophobia, as you understand after what I show you, a Jew is not a subhuman. He is not a human. He is inhuman. It's a microbe. It's dangerous. It's harmful. It's a satanic being. And we who are always fear. You don't despise a Jew. You fear a Jew. And it's a big difference, etc. And therefore, a Jew has to be eliminated or expelled. It used to be expelled, and when you cannot expel them, as we know in the 30s, you kill them, etc. And this is a poster that was produced by Vichy France, allied of the Nazi Germany, etc. And it said, tuberculosis, syphilis, cancer can be cured. Okay, they can cure cancer then in France. Well, thank God. And we must put an end to the greatest scourge of all, the Jews, because the Jews is incurable. And this explains why, finally, Vichy France decided to help the Germans to deport all the Jews of France to the extermination centers. And the only solution is whether to expel or to exterminate. It means to get rid and not to enslave. And this is a big difference with racism, etc. And this is quite a funny, I like to show it, etc., to make a little bit of humor, even if the men who used it didn't know that it was a nonsense, but kill all the Jews. Actually, we need to drink. It was in New York. So the final solution is whether to expel or purify, and it was the case I will explain to you. The first expulsion was in England in 1290, and the last one in Portugal in 1497, or even in Muslim Spain. You know that Maimonides was expelled from Muslim Spain, or to exterminate, and this will be the Holocaust. So this is also a classical postcard, German postcard before the First World War. What is the Zukunft? Where should the Jews go? It means they're not real German. They have to go nach Palästina. Now, of course, they have to leave Palestine, but before, the Holocaust, they have to go to Palestine. This is a big difference, of course. And the same here, another postcard, again, the German one, nach Palästina, whatever it costs. And whatever it costs, even if they will be killed like the Armenians in the desert of Syria or Iraq. And this is just for Charles. He spoke about anti-Semitism in Quebec, and this is somewhere in Quebec, in Saint-Agathe. It means Saint-Agathe, it's a French-Canadian village, and we want to keep as such, forbidden for Jews. And this is important to stress. The fact that the Jews were not welcome before the Holocaust, etc. So, Jews as an explanation of evil. And what is important, and this is why I want now to explain why these Jews were the scapegoat. No, I explained to you that the Jews are the traditional scapegoat, and the difference between anti-Semitism and racism. But why the Jews? That's the problem. Why? And you have to go back to the 11th century, and not to the 19th century. Even if the word anti-Semitism was coined in the 19th century, but the word genocide was invented by Lemkin in 1943. And I speak about Armenian genocide, 1915, which means you can use a word even for, events that have been before its creation, etc. And why? Because it's in fact in the Middle Age, and it's the Middle Age, central Middle Age, between the 11th and 12th century, that the old Christian anti-Judaism was transformed into anti-Semitism. And I explain to you very quickly the difference between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. Anti-Judaism, I would say it's a natural hatred of another religion. The Christian don't like Judaism, and you can understand why. The Muslim, they don't like so much Judaism, you can understand why. Then the Jews, they don't like Christianity and Judaism also. In the Talmud, you find terrible quote against Christianity. You don't like the other religion. And it means, and then it's important, anti-Semitism, as I told you, you don't like the Jews as such. And you will accuse them of things they are not. Anti-Judaism, you accuse the Jews of what they are, Jews, of what they don't do, or they don't believe. They don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. They don't believe that Muhammad was the last prophet. So you despise, you don't like them for what they are, for what they believe. I would say it's, in a sense, rational. You know, monotheist religion are quite, how would I say, intolerant compared to, you know, I would say polytheist religion. And in India, I think they've got 1 million of gods, one more, one less, who cares, it means. It's not the case with monotheists, etc. Anti-Semitism is different. It's not that you don't like the Jews for what they are, you don't like the Jews for what they are not. Christ killer, prophet killer, or responsible of killing of children, of diseases, of whatsoever. You understand the difference? It's a mythology, anti-Semitism. But of course it's connected. And you cannot understand anti-Semitism if you don't start with anti-Semitism. And I will go back to this. And I would say the link between anti-Judaism, the hatred of the religion, and anti-Semitism is the myth of Judah. You know, Judah supposed to be the one who betrayed Jesus. And this is the beginning and the origin of the idea of a Jewish plot. It's Jesus' trial and execution. Jesus, although a Jew like all his disciples, Jesus never meant a non-Jew. The first non-Jew he met was maybe Ponce Pilate or a Samaritan. Actually, they were Jewish too, but they were not considered then as Jew. So Jesus is presented as a victim of a Jewish and demonic plot, hatched by the Sanhedrin, the wise of the elders of Zion, with the help of a traitor, Judah, an example of physical and moral ugliness. Judah sold Jesus for money, sell his own soul to the devil, and finally committed suicide. And this is really the origin and the first explanation of why the Jews, if you want. And why Judah? Because Judah, what does it mean? It means Jew, Yehuda. So it's the Jew who betrayed Jesus, but Jesus was a Jew, and everyone at the Last Supper, they were Jew. And the responsible of his killing, they were not Jews, they were the Romans. But as you know, the church was captured by the Italian. It was Italian who finally, controlled the Catholic Church. And then Greeks who captured the Orthodox Church. They would not have accepted the idea that they were responsible of the death of their Messiah, of their God. So they say, it's not us, it's the Jew. And not only this, it's someone called Yehuda, someone called Jew. And this is the explanation, this is the base. And this is, I would say, a representation of Judah, Iscariot. And you can say it's 19th century, 20th century painting. No, it's 15th century, I'm sorry. It's a 15th century. It's in a small church in France. And look, Judah is not a human being. He's a monster. He's ugly. He looks like a Sturmer-like Jew. He sold his soul to the devil. It's a child representing his soul. And you can see that his stomach is like, the boars, I don't know what to say, of his money. And he killed himself. And he's not a human being. That's the difference. If you understand anti-Judaism, a Jew can be saved. He's still a human being. He has to convert. And he is accepted. A Jew cannot convert because he will be considered as a Jew. There is no salvation for a Jew. And the Last Supper, try to find where there is a non-Jew. There are no non-Jew, they're all Jew. And there are no women, which is absurd because I'm certain there were a lot of women. But this is like this. You know, religion, usually they're not feminist. And so you can see how Jesus was portrayed. Because how can you understand that people believe it? Because they were, you know, illiterate. So they learned from the painting, etc., from the liturgy, etc. And you will see that Jesus is representing, as I said always, as an Australian surfer. Huh? He's beautiful. You know, Brad Pitt. And look how, you know, Judah looks like. He looks like a Jew, even if Jew doesn't look like this. But this is how Jews will be represented century after century. And of course, through education, through catechism. In catechism, they will explain to the young people that the Jews were responsible of the death of God. And painting of, look, Judah being more and more Jew, and the Christ more and more like a German. It's Italian painting, and the all right is, and this is very interesting. This is a illuminating manuscript, and it's very interesting. Why? Because first you see that Jesus' trial is a plot between the Jew, the Sanhedrin, a man, you know, denouncing him for money. He's, you know, it's Judah touching the money. And then look, Ponce Pilate. How does it look like, Ponce Pilate? Ponte Pilatus, you know, the Roman procurator. He looked like a, what? How do you say? Pontus Pilatus. So, how is he represented? He's a Jew. He's got the Jewish head. Even, you know, the Roman is a Jew, which is totally absurd, of course. He was not. But you understand the Italian, you know, they didn't want, you know, them to be from Italian origin. He must be a Jew. The same, this is an English, you know, a representation, 13th century. And then you can see, of course, already, you know, the nose characteristics of the Jews. It's not 19th century or 20th century. It's a Middle Age representation. And look, Pontus Pilatus, he's got the Jewish nose and the Jewish head. So it's a problem of the Jews. And this explains, you know, the transformation of anti-Judaism to anti-Semitism, etc. And so the Jews as responsible of evil, and as I said, it was in fact in the Middle Ages that the old Christian anti-Judaism was transformed into anti-Semitism, and that explains why you will only find anti-Semites where you have Christian and Muslim people.
Can you say again what's the difference between anti-Judaism
Yes, I will after.
and anti-Semitism?
You don't like the religion, and you don't like the Jews. You don't like the religion because it's a competing faith, and you don't like the Jews because they are supposed to be... No, after, I promise, I will, because I don't have a lot of time. Okay. And then, what is interesting to say that it's limited to where you will find Muslim and Christian, and for instance, in India, you won't find anti-Semites. They don't care about the fact that Jesus was, who cares, it means. In China it was the same, in Japan whatsoever, and even during the Roman Empire. They despised maybe the Jews because the Jews were considered as lazy people, because they invent the Jews, you know, they invent the weekend, so lazy people. They didn't believe in a God because the God you couldn't represent it, and they didn't kill the child if it was handicapped, which was absurd according to a Roman, you know, pater familias, etc. So, why? Because Judaism is a competing faith, and even more, it's the matrix. How could you understand Islam and Christianity if you don't go back to the Torah? All the myths that you will find in the New Testament or the or the Quran is in the Torah, it means. The same thing for the Romans. The Romans, they don't care about the Torah. They care about, Homerus, l'Odyssée, Odysseus, and l'Odyssée et... I forgot. L'autre, the other book of Homerus. Iliad. How do you say Iliad in English? Iliad also. I speak English. It's incredible. I didn't know I speak English. So Iliad, and for instance, the Roman, they wanted to prove that they are connected to, the Greek civilization. They found in the Iliad whom? Aeneas, ancestor of the Romans. So they're part but competing. And it's the same with the Muslim. The Muslim, they wanted to be connected to the Bible. They look in the Bible, and Ishmael, it's our ancestor. Well, I don't believe Ishmael exists. I'm sorry, like Abraham, but it's okay. It's my face, or it must be my non-face, etc. Who cares? Not so important. So that's why you can only explain anti-Judaism, then anti-Semitism, if you understand, the fact that they are connected to Judaism. And so it's a problem. It was a problem for the father of Christianity and a problem for the father of Islam. How to cope with this heritage. So the problem is Christianity and Islam present themselves as the only heir of Judaism. This expression, we are the real Israel, the Verus Israel, and the Jews are the Vetus, the old Israel. So it's caduc, it's finished. We are the real one. Okay. The problem is, but how could you claim that you are the real Israel if actually the real Israel are still living? You cannot inherit it if the legatee is still alive, etc. And they don't want to recognize Jesus as the Messiah, etc. So how could you cope with this? That's a problem. So the second problem is, of course, that the gospel, like the Quran, is, as I said, essentially based on biblical story. The Christian, that wanted to prove that not only that the father of Jesus was God, but from his mother, he was from very good family because she was a descendant of the King David. And so they were looking to the Bible, etc., to the Torah. And so, and especially those who refused to disappear, the Jews did in fact control the initial and founding myth. And actually the first Christian, they were asking rabbis to help them because some of them didn't speak Hebrew. And they need the Jews to help them to prove that Jesus actually was the Messiah expected by the Jews. There was some relation, etc. And so, for instance, the problem was, who is right? And a good example is the Abraham sacrifice, etc. It means God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, but this is according to the Jewish tradition, and actually the Christian tradition, but according to some hadith, it's not Isaac who was designated, but his first son, Ishmael. You know that Abraham is a son from a servant, from Agar. And of course, according to the Torah, which was written 1,000 years before the Quran, and this is a problem. Who is right? The Quran, the tradition, Islamic tradition, or the Jewish tradition? And this is a problem, of course, for the founding father of Islam, because they knew that the Bible was preceded the Quran, etc. And this explains, of course, jealousy and envy. Because both Christianity and Islam, as I said, logically came to oppose the mother religion. And of course, this is a little bit of Freudian primary school explanation. I don't care. It's the position of the father that inspires the relationship between Judaism and his two daughter religion. And it's a family quarrel. It's exactly like the quarrel between, I would say, Stalin and Trotsky, or I would say between, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, or between, Romulus and Remus, or the first, killing in the Bible, Abel and Cain. It means the family quarrel are the worst, because it's the same religion, but the difference, my God, make the difference. And that's a problem. That's why I called anti-Judaism and not anti-Semitism as a neurosis. You know the difference between neurosis and psychosis? A normal person believes that 1 plus 1, not believe, no, that 1 plus 1 means 2. Okay? It's normal. Psychotic would say 1 plus 1, maybe it's 1,000,000, it's 3, it's whatever, maybe it could be 2, but psychotic, it doesn't know the reality, okay? For a neurotic person, 1 plus 1 mean what? It's 2. He knows it's 2, but he doesn't like the answer. So the Christian and the Muslim, they knew that they were Jewish in a sense. They knew that it was the origin of the religion was Judaism. But they don't like the idea. They don't like it. And this is a neurosis. And this is, I explain, anti-Judaism as a neurosis. Or you can see a cognitive dissonance, according to Festinger, the inventor of this concept, and I'm reading because I like to read, especially when it's in English. Dissonance occurs when a person is confronted with information that is not consistent with their belief. And this was the problem of the founding father of Christianity and Islam. And so there were 4 steps of the relation between, the first Christian, the first Muslim, and the Jews. The first time, identification. The second time, we are the real Jews, and the Jews will accept us. The Jews will convert, for sure. Some of them did. Things about, St. Paul. Then misunderstanding, why they didn't convert all of them. They didn't understand that Jesus is the real one, the last one, or Muhammad. And then jealousy, why they refuse, my God, they're crazy. They're horrible people. And then, of course, hate. And a good example is Muhammad. At the beginning, he believed himself more or less like a Jew. He was not connected, but believed it was the continuity, in a sense. At the first time, he was praying towards Jerusalem. He respect Yom Kippur. It was called Ashura. And then when the Jews refuse, he become to be a Jew hatred. And he will finally expel them after some battles. And he will invent, instead of Ashura, he will invent Ramadan, etc. And the same with Luther. At the origin, Luther was very pro-Jewish, believing that the Jews will convert to his reinterpretation of Catholicism. As long as the Jew refuse, he become a fanatic anti-Jew, etc. And so if you want to summarize what I said, one sentence made by a very brilliant French, not only historian, but I think he's got 3 PhD, this man. And he said the origin of hatred is the hatred of the origin. It explained everything. The origin of anti-Semitism and first anti-Judaism is the hatred of the origin. It's the same religion. But as the minor difference makes the big war, the worst war than you can imagine, etc. And so what are the solutions if you have a cognitive dissonance? In the case of neurosis, I'm speaking about neurosis now, and so it's Saint Augustine, who finally will find the solution. In the 4th century, Saint Augustine wrote that the Jew should not be killed, but condemned to dispersion and humiliation as a sign of the church victory over the synagogue. It's a kind of condemnation of eternal servitude that will be maintained for centuries. Annihilation is absolutely not advocated by the father of the church and even desire. So in the case of anti-Judaism, genocide is not an answer. You need to keep them as an example of what could happen if you refuse to accept the new faith, etc. And that's why, and the Jews are a necessary evil. And this explains why, actually, of course you will answer. First, it explains the myth of the wandering Jews. The Jews, for denying the fact that Jesus was the Christ, were condemned to exile for eternity till the end, and the end will be the conversion of the Jew to the real faith, which is still believed by, some Protestant United States, etc. La parousia, at the end, the Jews will convert. They will, and then also they are not allowed to go back to Israel. And this explains why the Vatican was the last country in Europe, the last state of Europe to recognize the state of Israel. Because it was very difficult for the Catholic Church to accept the fact that, Saint Augustine was wrong. the Jews are allowed to go back to Israel, and finally they accept it. And this makes a big difference between Catholic Church and Orthodox Church, because this is a step that Catholic finally did, and not the rest of Christianity, etc. The second solution was criminalization. It means the Jews, don't forget that in the antiquities and Middle Age, majority of the people were not Christian, they were pagans. You had to convert, you have to convince them. So you convince them by, humiliating the Jews, but even more, you have to criminalize them. They are the one responsible of death of Jesus. And the same with the Muslim. The Jews are prophet killers. They didn't kill any prophets, but this is what they say. Prophet killers, and actually they even kill Muhammad. They poison him. And still you can find today in some website the history of the poisonment of Muhammad by a Jew. It was a Jew which was paired, made a slave, etc., which was supposed to poison him, and etc. So you can see that today some myths are still alive and still explained. And the third solution was what I called, to decrease, as I said, the cognitive dissonance, is for the Christian theology of substitution, and for the Muslim theology of falsification. What does it mean for the Christian? Well, this is a representation not of anti-Semitism, but anti-Judaism, which is different. Why the difference is, if you remember how Judah was represented as a non-being, as a beast almost. This is different. She is a Jew. She is beautiful. I would say she is even more sexy than the Christian. And she can be saved because she's still a human being. How could she be saved? By converting, etc. But the problem is she's blindfolded. She is in error. And this is a classical representation of, it's called the victory of Christianity against Judaism, because she is blindfolded. She refused to recognize the truth, the Verus Israel. The spear is destroyed. It means the old alliance between God and the Jewish people is caduc, it's abolished, etc. And third, the Holy Scripture. Okay, we accept them. We will call it Old Testament. We will keep it because we need to prove that Jesus is the prophet announced by the Jewish prophet, by the Messiah, etc. But it's secondary, okay? It's a fragile sculpture. I wrote this in English to be sure. Muslim response is a little bit different. They even didn't respect the Torah. They don't call it the Old Testament. They reject it as they reject the gospel. According to the tradition, the Torah and the gospel are fake. They have been rewriting by terrible people, because in fact the real Torah and the real, New Testament announce already the venue of Muhammad as the last prophet, etc. And that the Quran precedes the Torah, because the Quran was created with the creation of the world. It's uncreated, it existed, which demonstrates the fact that finally, maybe Abraham was ready to sacrifice not his Isaac, but Ishmael, because it's precede actually, according to the tradition. This is falsification, and you can find this on internet because, it's polemics which still interest them. It said, according to the Quran, the sacrifice cannot be Isaac. According to the authentic Islamic tradition, the sacrifice is Ishmael. The Muslim scholar has solved this case a long time ago, and very early in the history of Islam, the popular Islamic tradition has integrated the fact that Ishmael was the sacrifice. Let the Christian missionary study the Quran thoroughly before calling upon ghosts that will frighten nobody but themselves. Indeed, the biblical version of the story, sacrifice your only son Isaac, so it means they recognize actually that this is a tradition, or sacrifice your firstborn Isaac is an enigma they must live with. So it means it's a fight that still continues actually, and this is a very clear keys of what I call falsification theology, etc. So consequence one, the Jews are both totem and taboo. You cannot cope with the Jews like you will cope with the, I don't know, the worshipper of the Egyptian gods. It will be forbidden or whatsoever. The philosopher, it means the Platonician or the Aristotelian, it will be forbidden, etc. It means the Jews will still be there, but it will be a totem and taboo. Jealous, despised, and humiliated, but still sacred and useful. And I have no time to explain that before 11th century, the Jews were useful for economical reasons, etc., whatsoever, and it will change later on, etc. They were, and I have no time, the embryo of the tertiary sector. They were what Ernest Gellner, actually of Czech origin, called a castrated caste, a castrated group, useful to perform activities that you didn't want to give to the population. And it was the case with the Jews and the clergy, who were also castrated. Why? Because they couldn't have children. So it was easy to have, as a middle class, or more or less the Jews, and especially the church. And so consequence, therefore, the Jews were to constitute the only tolerated minority in the Christian and Muslim city, and then gradually becoming the usual suspect and natural scapegoat, especially considering the fact that, as I told you, the fact that they were despised by the religion, and so, etc. So the Jews were an outlet for internal crisis and tension, and a judgment variable until today. And for instance, I have no time, but maybe I wanted to present this, but finally I changed my mind. But I think three explanations and three levels of anti-Semitism today. Three levels. The first one is what I call primary anti-Semitism. Primary anti-Semitism, what is it? Primary anti-Semitism is what I try to explain. Muslim and Christian, hostility to the Jews, and also extreme right, racist, and extreme left. The fact that some extreme left will consider the Jews as responsible of the banking system, the capitalism, etc. 19th century in France or even in Germany, of course, this is primary anti-Semitism. Then you've got secondary anti-Semitism, which is also explain a lot of today hatred towards Israel and the Jews. You know the very famous sentence of Zvi Rix, also a Viennese psychoanalyst, who said, the German will never forgive Auschwitz to the Jew. And I would say, the European will never forgive Auschwitz to the Jews. It means it's an anti-Semitism, not despite Auschwitz, but because of Auschwitz, the guilt. And it explains why people are very keen to say Israel is a Nazi state. They are the Nazi state as we used to. They are as worse as we are. This is secondary anti-Semitism developed by a German scholar. And then, according to me, there is a third level. It's what I called, I invented tertiary anti-Semitism, or calculation anti-Semitism is, I would say, opportunist anti-Semitism. It's not that I'm a real anti-Semite, but if it can help me to have the Muslim vote, to have constituency, why not? It means. And this is like Corbyn, which is also traditional leftist anti-Semitism, or someone called, Mélenchon in France. He's not an anti-Semite. Orban, etc. It's not. It's just calculation. And it's the case in Belgium. In Belgium, in Brussels where I live, 30% of the population is from Muslim origin. And there is a competition to know who is going to be the most anti-Zionist party. And some people in France, there was a tribune in Le Monde who said, well, it's not the same, the extreme right, it's real anti-Semitism, the left anti-Semitism is just opportunistic. Okay, it's true, but the consequence is the same. And I will give you one example. You heard about Laval. Laval was the prime minister of Pétain. Maréchal Pétain was, the dictator during the occupation of France. And Laval he was before, in the 30s, he was not an anti-Semite. He was not. He was even friend of the Jews. But, he understood that the only way to please the German was to give the Jews to the for deportation, and this is what he did. So the consequence for the Jews was, whether it was real primary anti-Semitism or tertiary anti-Semitism, it means who cares? They were sent to Auschwitz, etc. So this is the situation, I would say, and opportunists, etc. And so hostility to Jews of religious origin was gradually erected into a cultural code, for which arose first modern anti-Semitism, and I would say racist anti-Semitism. But racist anti-Semitism is just an avatar of this medieval hatred. It's just an avatar. And then by a tortuous and complex path, of course, Nazi exterminating, redeeming anti-Semitism, and finally, what I call today radical anti-Zionism. But I haven't finished yet. So anti-Judaism, according to me, is a neurosis, and it could be harsh for the Jews. It could be quite terrible. Look what John Chrysostom, which is the founding father of Orthodox Church, say, you did slay Christ. You did left violent hands against the master. You did spell his, and that's why the Jews will be considered as the scapegoat. And then another one, the synagogue is worse than a warhouse. It is the den of scoundrel and the repair of wild beasts, etc. And even the same with the Muslim. You know that even if we should consider the relation between the Jews and Islam till the 9th century as more anti-Judaism than anti-Semite. Today's anti-Semite, well, actually the situation of the Jews in the Arabic Peninsula was terrible. The Jews were totally wiped out and they were killed in several battles. All men in this battle, etc., were killed, and especially the most famous defeat of the Jews was Khaybar massacre. And you know that, I suppose, everywhere in Germany, in France, but in Belgium, when there is a demonstration against Israel, people will scream, Khaybar, Khaybar, all the Jews to the gas, etc. So for them, it's still a reference against the Jews, etc. And so the same pogrom, etc. As I said, anti-Judaism, the quarrel is theological, and then, as I said, after all, logical, if we think of the exclusivism of modernist belief, except that the guardianship of the fathers is rejected by launching a terrible accusation against the Jews, that of having killed Jesus, etc. Well, and to demonstrate the difference between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. And this is very funny. This is a poster made in Belgium in December 41, when the German has decided the final solution. It was decided in autumn 1941. Then they decided the creation of extermination center. And then in the same times in Belgium, the Catholic Church launched a campaign to convert the Jews to Catholicism. You imagine? In the same times. So for a Catholic, a Jew could be saved. And look how the Jews is representing, and he's giving his child to the Christ. Well, the German has other plan. And this is different, I would say, between anti-Judaism and between, I will say, anti-Semitism, etc. The same, another poster again for the Confession of the Jews. Anti-Semitism, according to me, is a psychosis. It's in the 12th century that anti-Semitism was really born. Hatred of Jews is certainly still religiously inspired, but is now distinguished from anti-Judaism by its totally irrational side. What is reproached to the Jew is no longer doctrinal, but totally phantasmatic. The Jews are no longer reproaches for what they are or believe, but for what they are not and do not. We're not allied with the devil. We don't kill children. We don't spread diseases. The Jews were accused of the worst infamy, natural disaster, epidemics, murder of children. And from then on, anti-Semitism is already essentially a social construction, a social disease of time of crisis and mutation, a powerful instrument of mobilization. This is when I believe the neurosis become psychosis. You can cure from neurosis, and I think the relation between Catholicism and Judaism now demonstrated the fact that John Paul II finally accepts the Jewish root means that it can be cured of, I would say, neurosis. It's more difficult to be cured of psychosis, almost impossible. So the Jews become responsible for the world misfortune, beginning of the massacre. There were no big massacre before the Crusades. And this is important to stress. There is no fatality to the hatred of the Jews or to the killing of the Jews. I finished. The Crusade, of course, it was the killing of the Jews, and you can see how the Jew is represented with his special head. Bravo. They were accusing, as you know, of Black Death. This is the Jews of some city of Belgium being executed, etc. And then the Jews will be considered as unuseful, and they will be expelled from Europe. The first country to expel the Jews were England, 1290, and the last one was Portugal, 2 centuries after, because they were still important economically in Spain and in Portugal. And it means that in the year 1600, there were no Jews in Europe left. There were Jews only where in what is called Holland now, some city of Italy, some city of Germany, and 80% of the Jews used to live in Poland. Most of the Jews used to be from Polish origin. 80% of the Jews were in Poland, because in Poland they still need the Jews as a tertiary. You know, they need it, those people. It's the Jews who actually created the Polish state and the Polish economy. And then 19th century, the Jews as ideal scapegoat. I finished here, etc. The problem, of course, of the Jews is the fact that they were successful, always jealousy, and I have no time to explain. I'll finish here. The fact, conspiracy theory linked to the Freemason. The racial anti-Semitism is a reaction to an overly successful integration. It's just a scientific justification for the rejection in a context of de-Christianization. It's a mutant virus, anti-Semitism, etc. And this is a representation, classical, of a left-wing magazine in France representing Jewish capitalism as responsible of the wars for money, and etc., 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 etc. And today, radical anti-Zionism, and we are to the return of traditional anti-Semitic vocabulary. Ancient myths are building blocks of contemporary anti-Semitic discourse. They serve as symbolic material. It means the Middle Age accusation. Alors, for instance, representation of Jesus, as you can see, Palestinian being the new Jews, and the Israeli being the Romans. Another explain, showing that, representing Palestine as Christ of the nation, etc. And then, today, how they see the Jews, today, how they see the Israeli, and radical anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism in the way, and I call radical anti-Semitism. The Israeli Zionists are hatred not for what they do or really are, but what they don't do. They don't kill children, and what they are not, evil creature with murderous practice, controlling capitalist system, poisoning, for instance, Arafat, killing, etc., genocide, for instance. The Israeli became those responsible of the misfortune of the world, and this is the last one. Die Juden sind unser Unglück, and then you've got a poster, a Nazi poster, a right-wing poster saying Israel ist unser Unglück, and this is maybe the last one, but let's wait. I will drink.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. The tour de force. So we have about 15 minutes for questions and comments.
How can you explain sometimes the fact that in certain
Vas-y alors, je vais noter peut-être. Vas-y, I will answer.
I wanted to offer a response to the
No,
colleagues
please,
asking the question.
could you ask a question?
No, but you can,
Yeah.
yeah, no problem. My English is, okay, go on. Go on.
From
No, it's okay for me.
experience, for example, the problem is
C'est
that
parce qu'il m'a
when
posé
you
une
promote
question.
anti-Semitism explicitly, it can get you into troubles with the law, with the penal code. So sometimes some groups hide behind what David Hirsch called plausible deniability, which means you use this double language which allows
Yeah.
you to always say, but I didn't mean it like that way. Typical with and the occupation, but in the end you find that they
Yeah.
don't mean occupation of the West Bank, they mean Tel Aviv as the occupation. And what they are hiding behind is the legal concept known as in dubio pro reo. That means if you have any doubts, you have to interpret them in a penal, in a criminal procedure in favor of the accused. So sometimes it is a way to protect oneself against criminal prosecution, but it's only a partial answer. There may be more.
Okay,
There's Isaac.
and I will answer also, and don't be afraid.
Professor, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup for the presentation. I liked it very much. I
Speak louder!
I certainly think that the Holocaust museums, educational institutions, schools would benefit greatly from having a broader overview and understanding of the comprehensive nature and the way that anti-Semitism or Jew hatred or anti-Judaism or these manifestations, how they change over time. So thank you very much. My question was going to the very term of anti-Semitism. I'm sure you would have gotten to it a little more, but the fact that it was coined in the late 19th century, making it sound more scientific, should there be a pushback, in a sense, from scholars to call it Jew hatred, to try to make it explicit what it is, because we often hear, I can't be anti-Semitic, I'm a Semite. We hear this part.
Ah, yes.
So we make it explicit to say it is what it is, what it was meant to be, or should we just try to explain it more on an ad hoc basis?
Mon Dieu. Oh yeah, go on.
Louis.
Thank you very much for your presentation. There's a piece missing, and I don't know if we have it or if you have it, but right now it appears that our biggest threat comes from the left, and the left notoriously has not been particularly interested in religion outside of what they're appropriating from Islam at the moment. With the sort of secularization, if you will,
C'est exactement.
of anti-Semitism, how can we follow what you call the cultural code in which the religious anti-Semitism, which is still very active in some right wing and very active with the Takfiri Salafists, how can we follow that through the sort of pressure cooker that Marxism did to religion and secularization?
Okay, maybe I can answer now. Or?
Good.
Okay, thank you. It's only good question, unfortunately. So, how to answer? Of course, the problem is ignorance. I would say a lot of people who are demonstrating against Israel are totally ignorant, and they believe by opposing Israel, they're fighting for the good. And that's the problem. They, as you said, fighting against colonialism, against apartheid, etc. And unfortunately, especially in Belgium, if you read the magazine and the newspaper, you will be totally intoxicated. That's the real problem. How to fight against ignorance, etc. The second thing is, as I say, also double speak. It means, of course, some of them they knew, and of course they don't want to be quoted as anti-Semite. And you can see that's why they will say we are only anti-Zionist, and some people will say that yes, but anti-Zionism is a virus that existed since 5,000 years, for instance. And of course it's just a question of vocabulary, and also of, when I say double speak, it means there is very, very interesting study made by a French explaining that, for instance, the Brotherhood, they take the vocabulary of the wokist vocabulary, defending the homosexual, and in fact doing exactly the contrary in their own country, and so this is the problem. So today it seems to be that if you want to be with the good person, you have to be more or less anti-Zionist, etc. But it's really it's a problem of, as I said, a double speak. And there are different layers of anti-Semitism, because even Mélenchon, which is a secular man, member of the Socialist Party, used to be Trotskyist, so you know. And in one of his speech, he spoke about the fact that the Jews betrayed Jesus, Mélenchon. So even, you know, that's why, you know, Freudian, it could be interesting because there are still unconscious, you know, tropes that exist. That's why it's a cultural code, as we say also. We you know, it's a, even if you're a non-believer, you will bear it unconsciously, all those accusations, etc. And when you call about the secularization of anti-Semitism, it exists already in the 9th century by the invention of the word anti-Semitism. It was a way to present the hatred of the Jews as something scientific. It means it has nothing to do with religion. We don't like them because they are racially different. And of course, as you know, Semitic people doesn't exist. There are Semitic languages. The Ethiopian, they speak a Semitic language. And well, we're not, and the Arabs are not, and the Jews are not related to them. So, and also what I say to those people, you can be Semitic and anti-Semite. You can be a Jew and anti-Semite, no? There are many Jews who are anti-Semite. You can be American and anti-American. It means who cares? But it's a very often, how to say, argument that I'm used to. It means it's totally absurd. It means, and
Some more questions?
but maybe not.
Anybody else on this side of the room with comments or questions? On this side? Row. And then
Yes, yeah.
Julian.
I'm interested in the distinction you made between being anti-Jewish or anti-Judaism and
Yeah.
anti-Jewish. And what you just mentioned now being Jewish anti-Semitism. You touched on it very slightly on use of anti-Semitic imagery like Soros
Yeah.
today. I was wondering if you could talk about sort of distinction between those two, Jewish anti-Semitism, both from, I guess, the right and the left.
Wow, this would need a lot of talk, etc. But you can be. It means you can be. I think you have to make a difference between what I said, what I called anti-Zionism and radical anti-Zionism first. So you can be hostile to the idea of a Jewish people, even if I don't understand it, especially after the Holocaust, which justified the fact that Jews need a home state. But for instance, the Hasidim, some of them, you can see very often in demonstration, you will find, you know, Hasidim, you know, and especially some of them, some sects, some Niture Karta, for instance, who will, you know, demonstrate against Israel in New York, whatsoever, in Antwerp, etc. And I wouldn't quote them anti-Semitic, even if. Then you've got also the problem of how to say, Selbsthass, you know, the fact that, you know, some people, they hate their own condition. And, you know, the classical example is Otto Weininger, this young genius who killed himself, I think, in the age of 20. And Hitler said about him, it's the only Jew I like, because he killed himself, for instance. And then you got also those people, because it's very, very, very interesting, but I'm over 60, so I'm of a certain generation, and some of our children, and of children of my friend, the children, they are, you know, inspired all by what is called the wokist, or I would say the cultural left ideology, and they will oppose also in the name of the good, because they also believe, you know, that the fact that Israel is on the wrong side, etc. And sometimes it's difficult to discuss even with some Jewish people. And I think in some campuses in the United States, you find Jewish people demonstrating against Israel. And how would you explain this? And also I would say you will need psychological explanation to understand this. But I'm not sure I really answer your question, but it's a major thing. And also you have to understand that the tradition of the Jews who consider that the Jews, they are a prophetic people, that we are superior to the rest, and that we cannot cope with a national state like the French or like the Palestinian. We are supposed to be the light. And so a state is not for us. A state is for bad people, etc. And some people will, so you will have people who are anti-Zionists because of hatred of themselves, and others because of, I would say, sacralization of themselves. We are a prophet people. We cannot cope with, we cannot se salir les mains, we cannot put our hands into blood like any other people. And Steiner, for instance, this kind of Jews who consider nationalism is not for us. We are a prophetic people. Unfortunately, we need a state.
Mike, just real quick, going back to what our colleague said there about the term anti-Semitism. I think it's been overused and it's lost its essence. We really have to come up with something that is more impactful to shock people. Something like, they're wanting to commit genocide against the Jews.
Yeah.
Right? So it should be genocidal Jew hatred. Something that has so much weight. That's one. Second thing is, don't let Paul off the hook, because some of these tropes against the Jews came from St. Paul.
Yeah,
So
it's
don't
true.
let him off the hook.
Oh no, I agree with you. But unfortunately, we have to accept the word that is used by scholar and by politician, etc. It's anti-Semitism. There is a French scholar called Taguieff who said we have to use Judeophobia. But nobody is using it. So we are fighting against anti-Semitism. And an absurd word, because Semites doesn't exist. And actually they know what it means. That's why they don't want to be quoted as anti-Semite, but they say we are only anti-Zionist. But especially when you believe that the Jews are Christ killer, or that you believe that Israel should be destroyed, of course they're anti-Semitic. I'm sorry.
So final comment, and then we'll wrap it up. So please be concise.
No, but you can import codes from the outside. For instance, in traditional Islam, there were no anti-Semitism. For instance, if you read the Quran or the tradition of Islam, Jesus was not killed. He was just captured by God. But now, today, it means all the propaganda that the Palestinian or the pro-Arabs using is coming from, I would say, the Christian tradition. And so you can use it especially. And in Japan, actually, I don't know China, so don't ask me about China. I know nothing about China. But it means considering, in a sense, there is, how would you say, circulation between civilization and area. And in Japan, in a sense, that inherit the fact that the Jews are behind the scene, and they are beyond, and they accept the fact that the Jews are controlled capitalism, etc., and that they were responsible of the Second World War. So you can inherit it, myths that didn't belong tradition in your own tradition.
So Misha, 30 seconds.
Yeah. I just want to ask you, what about Persia? What about Rome before Christianity?
Very good question.
What about Syrians? The Antioch time? What about Pesach? What about Egypt? How did you integrate this into your system? It all stems
As an historian, I don't consider the Bible an historical book. I'm sorry. And the same with Esther scroll. If you hear, I've been listening to Yehuda Bauer conference, and he said that it was written during the Hellenistic time. It's anti, Antiochus Epiphanes, who tried, and it has nothing to do with Persia, according to historian, because I'm an historian. The rest is you write with Alexandria. I think this is an anti-Semitic moment. The first pogrom during the time of Philon of Alexandria, I think it's already anti-Semitic. But it's too long. But it's too long.
On that positive note, so Joel, on behalf of everybody, thank you very much. Or a tour de force. Merci.
Où est-ce qu'on mange? Where do